Hi, good evening, everyone. We're about to get started. My name is Michelle Watson, and I work at NAMI New Hampshire. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We are the New Hampshire chapter, and we provide support, education, and advocacy for those impacted by mental illness and suicide. Um, Throughout the year, we provide a variety of webinars, and so we're really excited to provide this one for you tonight. Let me give you a little bit of background about our speaker. Her name is Lisel Pacheco, and she is Senior Director of Programs at the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. She is also a NAMI New Hampshire volunteer. She serves in this role, she oversees the foundation's services and initiatives that facilitate individual, family, and system level change for military and veteran caregiving families, healthcare providers, and policymakers. Prior to serving as the Senior Director of Programs, Lisel led the Foundation's clinical training offerings and the development of the Foundation's first ever mental wellness program offerings. Before joining the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, Lisel worked in the mental health field, serving as a residential counselor at Children's Hospital and as a mental health counseling intern at a university counseling center. Prior to pursuing a clinical training, Lisel worked at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, where she served as research and training coordinator, followed by the grants and research program manager. As I said, Lisel's a volunteer with NAMI New Hampshire and a family facilitator. She was also just elected onto our board of directors. She's originally from Woodstock, New York, and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Law and Society from American University. And she has a Master of Arts in Mental Health Counseling from Boston College. She now resides in Dover, New Hampshire with her husband, cat, and new puppy, who we were just hearing about some of his antics. So I will turn it over to Lisel. We will have the chat and Q&A function available. So please put your questions in there for Lisel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Lisel Pacheco. You may see, if you look up the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, you may also see me listed as Perez Rogers. For anybody who has gotten married and tried to change their name, it is a process. So there's currently Pacheco and Perez Rogers everywhere. It is all me. Probably the only Lisel that you'll find out there. So I am going to share my screen. Feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, as Michelle mentioned, or feel free to use the Q&A feature. I do have some interactive slides on here. So if you want to keep your phone nearby, you'll need to take that out a little bit later on, but hoping to make this pretty engaging. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
So today we're going to talk about the impact of caregiving on military and veteran caregiver mental wellness. And we are going to talk a bit about who hidden heroes and hidden helpers are. Those are the terms that we use at the foundation to describe military and veteran caregivers. And I'll go into more detail on each of those definitions. I hope by the end of this webinar, you'll understand the role of caregivers in veteran health outcomes, and be able to recognize the unique factors that contribute to military and veteran caregiver mental health and wellness. And then hopefully walk away with some practical tips to more effectively engage with some of the caregivers in your community, or those in your family, or those that you just support in your day-to-day. Just quickly, a little bit of background on the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. We were founded in 2012 by Senator Elizabeth Dole after she spent time at Walter Reed Army Medical Center with her husband, Bob Dole. And while he was there recovering from some of his injuries, she started connecting with some of the other family members who were there supporting their wounded, ill, or injured veterans. And she, in these conversations with these family members, she realized that they were all caregivers and that nobody was really recognizing the role that they had taken on and the support that they were providing to their loved one. So in 2012, she founded the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and our mission really is to strengthen and empower and support military and veteran caregivers and their families. And we do this through a number of different ways. We do this by raising public awareness about caregivers. We support research. We promote different policy changes. And we really try to partner with different organizations and communities to really make an impact on caregiving lives. And our ultimate vision is a country that honors the service of military and veteran caregivers and their families by recognizing, supporting, and investing in them. So who are hidden heroes and hidden helpers? So hidden heroes are the spouses, parents, family members, and friends who care for America's wounded, ill, or injured veterans. And hidden helpers are the children, the youth, and the young adults who are either providing some hands-on care to a veteran or who are just impacted by the care needs of their veteran loved one. And when we talk about caregivers at the foundation, we really want to be inclusive of all different caring relationships. So we do have spouses, parents, family members, friends, neighbors. We include the children in that because we want to recognize that there's all different types of people in the community who are providing care to our wounded, ill, and injured veterans. We're also really intentional about not quantifying caregiving. So you don't have to do a certain number of a certain amount of caregiving hours per week to be qualified as a caregiver. As you all know in the definition for hidden helpers, it can be just being impacted by the care needs of your loved one. So we try to be as inclusive as possible because we really want to make sure that we're getting anybody who's caring for a wounded, ill, or injured veteran connected with the support and services that they need. So when we're thinking about our caregivers, our hidden heroes, these adult caregivers, and we're talking about some of the caregiving responsibilities that they take on, it's really going to vary from family to family. Every family is going to be unique. But our caregivers may support activities of daily living. So those are those really critical functions that you need to do on a day-to-day basis, such as moving around. So that's that mobility piece. It could be bathing, grooming, dressing, support with toileting, transferring, eating, really those basic needs to keep going about daily life. And then we have our instrumental activities of daily living that caregivers may support with, and that might include shopping and meal prep, doing things around the house, keeping that household running. Maybe it's taking on extra laundry or providing financial management for the household. This could be wound care, managing medications and appointments, or driving their loved one to and from appointments. So caregivers may take on a number of these, they may take on a few of these, they may only take on one of these. It's really going to vary depending on the needs of the veteran. But these are just some of those key areas where a caregiver may be providing support to their loved one. And then we have the kids in these homes who are also engaged in care for their wounded, ill, or injured loved one. And oftentimes this is a parent, but it could be another another relationship. It could be an older sibling, it could be a grandparent, it could be an aunt, an uncle, a cousin. But most often what we're seeing with our hidden helpers is it tends to be a parent. And so depending on the age of the hidden helper and their maturity level, they may be taking on different care tasks. As we said, they may also just be impacted by the needs of that wounded, ill, or injured parent. But our hidden helpers do things like support with ADL, so those activities of daily living. So maybe they are helping their wounded family member brush their teeth every day. They also support those instrumental activities of daily living, which really kind of coincides to that last image you see on taking on extra chores. So that might be helping with meal prep or feeding younger siblings, doing laundry for siblings. They also provide that support for other family members. Maybe that's babysitting, maybe that's driving younger siblings to their appointments or to their extracurricular activities. And then they may also just provide comfort care to their recipient if they're not old enough or they don't have the ability to provide more of that hands-on care. So caregiving for a child may look like just sitting with their parent and helping keep them calm or keep them distracted, and just knowing that there's someone there for them. So our caregivers do quite a bit. It takes a family to support wounded, ill, and injured veterans. And all of that work really does pay off when we look at health outcomes for the veteran. So when caregivers are involved in their veterans care, they're really able to monitor the veteran's symptoms and monitor how well that veteran is responding to treatment, because they're there with their veteran more hours than the providers are there with them. They're there between the appointments. So they're really able to notice the changes in their veteran over time. They're also able to help the veteran adhere to their treatment plan. We have a big program at the foundation called Campaign for Inclusive Care, which we lead in partnership with the VA. And the goal of that program is to make sure that caregivers are included in the veteran's care team from day one. So the very first time that veteran goes to the VA for an appointment, the provider is asking that veteran if there's someone who helps them out at home. They don't necessarily have to say caregiver, because not everybody identifies with the word caregiver, but they're asking, hey, is there someone who helps you out at home, who helps you remember to take your medication, or changes your bandages, or helps you with your physical therapy exercises? So they're asking if there's anybody in the family who is providing that support to the veteran. And if the veteran says yes, they're inviting that caregiver into the room to be part of the appointment, to be part of the conversations with the care team. And when caregivers are brought into the room, they can provide emotional support to the veteran during the appointment. They can also provide a more complete and accurate picture of how the veteran is doing, how they're responding to treatment, any new symptoms, because sometimes the veteran may not share everything that's going on for a number of different reasons. They might not be able to remember everything that's happened between the appointments, but that caregiver can step in and kind of fill in those gaps. And when the provider gets a more complete picture of how the veteran is doing, they can provide a more accurate treatment plan. They can also then, the provider can also then check in with the caregiver to make sure that the caregiver feels comfortable and equipped to provide the care that the veteran needs between those appointments. They can answer any questions the caregiver might have. They can also offer alternatives if the caregiver thinks that something in the treatment plan isn't feasible. And when caregivers are included, when they feel like they can carry out the treatment plan, this leads to, again, that greater adherence to the veteran's treatment plan, ultimately a decrease in veteran hospitalizations, and then the veteran health outcomes improve. And when veteran health outcomes improve, we hope that provider burnout will be reduced because their patient is doing better. So our caregivers are doing a lot, and it's having a really positive impact on their veteran. However, caregiving is a lot of work, and it has an impact on our caregivers' mental health. So when we look at adult caregiver mental health, so back when when Senator Dole founded the Elizabeth Dole Foundation in 2012, one of the first things that she did was she commissioned the RAND Corporation to conduct a study on military and veteran caregivers. And this was published in 2014 and really guided the work of the foundation for the next decade. And I know I'm citing a study that is 10 years old. I promise we have a brand new study being released later this year. I just can't share those findings quite yet, so we're sticking with the 2014 data. But that study really found that caregiver mental health is directly affected by the stress and burden of caregiving. And that impact of caregiving is more pronounced among those post 9/11 caregivers. So anybody who served after September 11th, 2001. But you'll see even with the pre 9/11 caregivers from all eras of service are more likely to meet criteria for major depression, and they're more likely to experience higher rates of anxiety. They're also, what we've heard from our caregivers, and this we'll get into a little bit later on in this presentation, what we hear a lot from caregivers is beyond that clinical level of impact, there's this loss of personal identity, there's compounding stress, there's grief and complex emotions, and then there's also this isolation from family, friends, and their community because they don't understand the caregiving lifestyle. And a lot of military and veteran caregivers have shared with us, for example, they may not be able to go to that barbecue on the 4th of July because their veteran becomes very triggered by the fireworks. And there's a lot of family, friends, and community members who don't understand and think that they just aren't making the effort to go. But that's not the case. They're trying to protect their loved one. Um, so caring for a loved one, as great and as many benefits as it has for that veteran, really does take a toll on caregiver mental health. And it's not just the adult caregivers. There are impacts on these kids growing up in caregiving homes as well. Um, and so we did a study back in 20, I think it was conducted in 2020 and it was published in 2021. And we did this study in partnership with Mathematica. And the purpose of the study was really to identify how many kids were living in homes with a wounded, ill, or injured veteran, and what were the impacts of caregiving on those kids. And we found that there's 2.3 million kids living in homes with a disabled veteran. And that these kids who are caregiving for a wounded, ill, or injured veteran are experiencing higher levels of anxiety and depression. They're experiencing isolation from peers. They're less engaged and they're not participating as much in school, and they're deprioritizing their own needs. And so these kids are giving up a lot to provide care for their veteran. And we have a whole program at the foundation that's called Hidden Helpers. We have a Hidden Helpers Coalition, where we have 100 or more than 100 organizations who have agreed to promote awareness of hidden helpers and start creating resources that better meet their needs. I should have also mentioned this at the start. So we use this term hidden helpers. You may also see terms if you're looking into children who are providing care to a loved one, whether that be for a military service member or veteran or just a parent. Some other common terms you might see are young carer. That's really commonly used all around the world. You may also see youth caregiver. They can all sort of be used interchangeably, but if you're looking just to dig into more of the research around it, young carer is probably going to pull up the most amount of information on this. But we do use the term hidden helper specifically to refer to the children of military service members and veterans. So we do have a number of resources that are in development for our hidden helpers. I'm not going to dive into those resources on this presentation, but I'm happy to provide more information to anybody who's interested after this. But what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a resource that we created called the Caregiver Mental Wellness Framework. And this is really focused on adult military and veteran caregivers. However, I do think there's content in here that's really relevant to anybody who's a caregiver, not just folks who are caring for a wounded, ill, or injured veteran. But our Caregiver Mental Wellness Framework was launched in May of 2023, so just over a year ago. And we spent over 2 years developing this framework with a cohort of caregivers. And basically what we did is we wanted to create something that really validated the mental health impacts of caregiving and identified what is contributing to those impacts on caregiver mental wellness. And we didn't really know what that was going to be. And so we convened this work group of caregivers and we met with them, I want to say every week to start, and then maybe we went every other week and then eventually monthly over the course of 2 years. And we just really started talking with them about their mental wellness experience and what it was like before they were a caregiver. How did it change since they became a caregiver? And what elements of their life were having the biggest impact on their mental health? And so after 2 years of working with caregivers, we really kind of synthesized everything we learned into this caregiver mental wellness framework. And we identified these 6 key elements that were having a really big impact on caregiver mental wellness. And that's not to say these are the only areas. There's certainly other areas that are impacting mental wellness, but these were a few of the big ones. And they were personal identity, compounding stress, big emotions, the power of peer-to-peer, finding time, and caregiver-specific resources. So we're gonna take a deep dive into each of these. And as we talk about them, I've got some questions for you to engage with if you'd like. And this is where you'll need your phone, but if the app is not working or if the website is not working, you can always drop your responses in the chat. And this is totally optional, so you don't have to respond if you don't feel comfortable. But I'll explain how to access the webpage when we get there. So we're going to dive into personal identity. So personal identity is really all about finding that space to nurture and develop the parts of your identity that make you feel like you. And what we heard a lot from our caregiving community was that this caregiver identity really became all consuming. And our caregivers ended up giving up parts of themselves. So a lot of our caregivers have given up their careers. They gave up going to school. They gave up hobbies, extracurriculars that they used to engage in because of their caregiving responsibilities. And after caregiving full time for so long, they kind of lost touch with who they were before they were a caregiver. So I invite you to, if you'd like, to participate and think back, if you are a caregiver, to who were you before you were a caregiver. And this can be if you're caregiving for a military service member or a veteran, or maybe you're caregiving for a family member, maybe you're a parent and now you're caregiving for a child, maybe you're caregiving for a grandparent, and this can be any type of care. Again, it doesn't have to be military connected. But were there parts of your life that you had to give up um, to really take on this caregiving role? Um, or if you're not a caregiver, is there a caregiver you know who had to give up some part of their life? Let me hit start here. Oh, let me go back. I will start. So if you do populate a response, it will come up. We'll just give it a minute. But again, we've heard from our caregivers that they often lose an understanding of who they were. And so we encourage caregivers to think back to who they were before they were a caregiver, because those parts of your identity are still really important, and it's still really important to foster an identity outside of caregiving. And this could be small things. Maybe you loved to paint. Maybe you were an artist before you were a caregiver, right? And so something you might be able to do for self-care on a more regular basis, even for small amounts of time, is go back to painting. Um, Maybe you gave up a career, but maybe there's something that you could do. You could volunteer to kind of fill that gap and use those professional skills. So we really just encourage caregivers to kind of reflect back on who they were before they were a caregiver. So if you did want to respond to this, I realize I forgot to explain that. You can go to menti.com and put in that code right at the top of the screen, or you can scan the QR code. So I see we have one response. Someone was a computer programmer. I don't think you can come off mute, and I can't seem to find the chat. What is this, the Q&A? Oh, okay, this is a Q&A. But it sounds like someone was a computer program, a fisherwoman. I ended up paying little attention to my own health. Yeah, that is something that we hear often, that everybody else's needs really, really come first. And the caregiver health comes last. So when we're thinking back to who you were before you were a caregiver, it does kind of tie to that self-care piece, right? Because it can help you kind of identify where to carve out those moments for you to really re-nourish yourself, and connect with those other parts of your identity. All right, I'm gonna, oh, I was less serious, yeah. So those changes really in kind of outlook and personality for sure. Used to exercise more. And so we'll get to later on some ideas around really building in that time to care for yourself as a caregiver. Well, thank you all for participating. We'll have plenty more. So our next one is compounding stress. And so here we're really talking about that journey of caring for your loved one, adding this unique layer of stressors on top of all your typical stress of daily life. So we recognize with our caregivers that they're dealing with the same stressors all of us are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but then they have this added layer of caring for a wounded, ill, or injured veteran. And those other stressors don't just go away. They have to manage all of them. And so that stress really builds on itself. And so I want to invite you to take a moment to kind of just sit and reflect on the past week and think about your stress level. And I say the past week because it can really change from day to day. And that's very typical for caregivers. I think it's typical for anybody in daily life. I could tell you yesterday, I was totally stress-free. I took the day off. I went to the beach, had a really relaxing day. Today, I came into 160 emails. And my stress level went straight up in the air. So I probably went from like a 1 or 2 to an 8. So think back to the past week and how you would rate your stress level. And if you are completely stress-free, please share with the group what your secret is, because we all want to know. I see quite a few of you are at an 8. So that's pretty high on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being overwhelmed by stress. That's pretty high. And that might be from your caregiving responsibilities, that might be from work, that might be from school, that might be financial responsibilities. They all kind of contribute to that stress level. Thank you for participating in that. Our next one is big emotions. And really the best way to describe this one is caregiving is emotional. And we really want to encourage caregivers to offer themselves compassion as they experience the many different feelings that are going to come with this caregiving journey. And we spent a really long time with this particular element and trying to figure out what to call it. How do you capture all of the emotions, the very complicated emotions that come with being a caregiver, those conflicting emotions that you might feel on a day-to-day, a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. And we really settled on big emotions. And we settled on big emotions because we want to recognize that there are no bad emotions. Like there may be really good feeling emotions and good emotions, but no emotions are bad, and that they all serve a purpose. Some may feel overwhelming at times, and that's okay. So we really just wanted to provide that space for caregivers to know that whatever emotion they're feeling, that it's okay and it's valid and it is serving them a purpose. So we have another interactive slide. So again, thinking back to the past week, what are 3 emotions that you've experienced? And this should populate into a word cloud. So if more people say the same word, that word will get bigger. Sometimes what we've overwhelmed is it, yep. Overwhelmed is one that we get, I think, every time I've done this question. Sad, worried, frustration for sure, angry, love, worried, happy. So I think what's really telling here is you have some of these emotions that are kind of these polar opposites, right? You have happy and sad, you have love, and you have anger, and that they can all exist at the same time within the same hour, same day. Um, we've heard a lot about a lot of grief is a really big one we've heard from our caregiving community. Um, Even though their loved one is still with them, they're, maybe grieving the future that they thought they might have. Or that person has changed a lot and isn't the person that they once knew, and they're grieving that piece. Um, and then there's also these moments where you're really feeling proud of your loved one. Maybe they reached a milestone in their care or in their health journey, right? And it may not be the future that you imagine for them, but you're really proud of them for reaching that milestone. Um, and so all of those emotions that come in these different waves and come at the same time are okay. And it's very normal. So that was really our goal with this Big Emotions, is to provide that validation and normalization of all of the different emotions that come with being a caregiver. And then our next one is power of peer-to-peer. So here what we heard from caregivers was that being a caregiver can be a really isolating experience. Um, and there's a lot of people, again, other family members, friends, community members who are not caregivers who don't get it. And it can be really exhausting for caregivers to have to explain their caregiving situation to other folks around them. And so we really wanted to highlight that importance of being able to connect with other caregiver peers, where there is this almost kind of baseline understanding. And we know that everybody's caregiving situation is going to be unique, but there's also going to be some similarities. And if you are a caregiver to a loved one, and you meet somebody else who's also a caregiver to a loved one, there's almost this kind of baseline understanding of what you're both going through. And so our caregivers share that really being able to connect with other caregiving peers and not having to explain everything was incredibly powerful and helpful, especially in combating that isolation that comes with being a caregiver. So I want you again kind of think back to the last time that you had a meaningful connection with somebody, and how did it take place? And I believe you can select more than one on this one. So was that an in-person connection? Was it over text? Was it a phone call, a video call? So maybe it was a Zoom or it was a FaceTime call. Maybe you had a really powerful email that you received from somebody. Maybe someone sent you a kind message on social media. Or maybe there's another way that we didn't think of. So we had a lot in person, one person over text. We have never had anybody say social media, which I think is telling. But we have had some people say they've gotten a really meaningful connection over email. And really here, what we're trying to highlight is, for a lot of our caregivers, they're not only emotionally isolated, but they're physically isolated, right? And they can't necessarily go out and connect with people. And so we want to highlight here that these kind of meaningful connections with peers can happen in a number of different ways, right? So it can be definitely in person. I think that's always our most popular one. People get a lot out of that in-person connection, but they can also happen over text. They can also happen with a phone call. I just had a colleague, an old colleague, call me right before this, and it was just really nice to catch up with her. And it was really meaningful that she reached out after we hadn't connected for a little while. So you don't always have to be in close physical proximity with someone to have that meaningful connection. And if you are not a caregiver yourself, but maybe you have a family member who's a caregiver, a friend who's a caregiver, sometimes just sending that text message of, hey, I'm thinking about you, and no pressure for a response, but I'm here if you need anything, can go a really long way in creating that meaningful connection. And doing that outreach, so that it's one less thing that caregiver has to remember to do. They don't have to reach out to you. And that can be really helpful as well. And then our next element was finding time. And really the gist of this one is that there's never enough hours in the day. But we really want to hit home for caregivers that even though it does feel like there's not enough hours in the day, it's really critical to find that time to get those small moments of caring for yourself as you're caring for all those around you. And what I always like to share with this one is it doesn't have to be anything super time consuming. Finding time for yourself does not have to be costly. You can almost kind of build in time for yourself throughout your day to day. And one example I always liked to share was, say you have a dog. I have a dog now. New dog mom. Don't know what I'm doing, but I really like listening to podcasts. So while I'm walking the dog, I can listen to my podcast. So walking the dog is something I have to do, but I can find that time for myself during that walk by listening to my favorite podcast or listening to my favorite music. This could also mean maybe you have to take a shower, spending an extra couple minutes in the shower for that alone time, taking a break. This might be reading a couple of pages of your favorite book at night before you go to bed or first thing in the morning when you wake up. Maybe it's only 5 minutes or maybe it's only 3 pages. That's okay. That is still time for yourself. And if you set these kind of small, easily achievable goals, you'll be more likely to reach those goals and continue with them. The most important thing is that it's intentional. Whatever it is that you're doing, it's intentional. I'm also a really big proponent of intentionally doing nothing. Um, so maybe you just sit for a few minutes and you don't do anything, but you're being intentional about not doing anything, and that's okay. I think I use that one quite often. I just really enjoy that. And giving yourself permission to take that break, right? There's so many other things that are happening that need to get done, but you're giving yourself permission to take a break. So again, take a minute to reflect and think about the last thing that you did to show yourself kindness or extend yourself grace. Maybe you needed a break and you took one. Maybe you let the dirty dishes sit in the sink overnight, or you didn't unload the dishwasher right away, or you let yourself hit snooze uh, an extra couple times in the morning. I kind of do that a lot. Played my New York Times games, binge watched a show. Nice. I'm a big fan of the New York Times Connections one. Binge watched a show. Always looking for recommendations on that one. Made myself a healthy but tasty dinner. That's awesome. Sat outside. Yeah. Got ice cream. Oh yeah, it's definitely ice cream season. So also, if you maybe weren't sure of the last time you showed yourself kindness or extended yourself grace and you want ideas, these are some really good ideas right here. Got a second one for ice cream. I will third that. Could sit outside and eat ice cream, and then you hit 2 of them. Awesome. All right. And then our last element was caregiver specific resources. And so what we heard a lot, especially from our military and veteran caregivers, was there's a ton of resources out there. But it's really difficult to kind of sort through this information overload when it comes to all the resources that are out there. And maybe you do sort through some of that noise, and then you find a resource and you think it might be the one for you, and you go through all of this multi-step process, say, of filling out an application, only to find out after an hour of work that you're not eligible for it, or your veteran's not eligible, or your family's not eligible for it. So what our caregivers were really looking for were these trusted resources that other caregivers have tried and recommended, and to really kind of help sort through that information overload. So one thing we really tried to do with our mental wellness framework is we really started to collect some of those resources. What are the organizations that caregivers have reached out to and provided a lot of support um, to them? We also started collecting really some informal resources from our caregiving community, recognizing that not everybody needs that formal support. Sometimes some informal support can really go a long way. And by informal support, what I mean there is we asked our caregivers, what's your go-to song to really uplift your mood, to pump you up, right? And we got a number of different song recommendations from caregivers. And so we built out a Spotify playlist that the caregiving community, anyone actually, could access on Spotify. But it's all songs that caregivers have recommended that really make them feel better. We asked caregivers, for their favorite quote that's inspirational to them. We asked what's their favorite book, and that could be fiction or nonfiction. Sometimes, you want to learn more about the care you're providing for your loved one, maybe their wound, illness, or injuries, but other times you want to escape into a fictional world, and that's perfectly okay. So what are your favorite books? We also asked lessons learned, right? If you were, thinking back to when you first started your caregiving journey, what advice would you want then that you know now? So it's kind of like a lessons learned. And a lot of our caregivers really kind of highlight this need to take time for themselves and making sure you're caring for yourself as you're caring for your loved one. So we have all of these formal and informal resources compiled. Our website is under construction though, so we haven't quite figured out how to make it all publicly available, but we try and share as much as we can. But one day it will all be up there and ready. But my last kind of interactive question for you is to think about how resourced you are for whatever your current situation is, the current demands of your life. How well do you feel like you know of the resources around you? So this knowledge of resources that can help you, but then also what's your ability to access those resources? Because we might know about all the resources, but that doesn't always mean we can access them. But this group is very clearly on top of it. We got 9 and 9 for knowledge and access to resources. Now I got 9.5. We'll just send everybody to this group whenever they need a resource. That's really awesome. I'm so happy to see that there's such high numbers. That's really good. Awesome. Well, that is my last interactive slide. So I appreciate all of you participating. So our mental wellness framework, it does live on our website if anybody wants to go check it out. It actually is this, when it's printed, it unfolds into this big poster, and it has the 6 dimensions. And then within each of those 6 dimensions, it really goes into detail on what some struggles might feel like in that particular area of your life, and then some caregiver recommended strategies for coping with that specific area. So if you're really struggling with personal identity, who you are outside of being a caregiver, we kind of break down what some of those struggles might look like or feel like, and then some ways to really kind of get back in touch with who you are outside of being a caregiver. And so we do that for each of the 6 elements. And then for each element, we also have a section on the bottom for supporters of caregivers. So if you're not a caregiver yourself, but you know caregivers, you work with caregivers, there's some tips on ways that you can kind of support caregivers in each of these key elements as well. But what we really hope is that, by kind of engaging with this content, you get a taste for either how the framework could be helpful for you or how you could use it to engage with a caregiver in your life, and really either receive validation from it yourself as a caregiver or help provide some of that validation for other caregivers. Or maybe you have caregivers in your life and you've always wanted to talk to them about their caregiving experience, but you're not quite sure where to start. The framework really can provide like a good shared language and some good ideas on how to start that conversation and topics to talk about. Um, I'm also going to dive into a few more tips, but a lot of these are in that framework. And if anybody is interested, we're also happy to mail you a physical copy. There is a lot of text there, so it's a little bit tough to read online, but it's a really useful tool. And we've been evaluating it over the last 6 months. And it seems like it's been helpful for folks who are using it. So we want to get it out there and definitely want to either provide that support to you as a caregiver, or if you want to provide it to folks again, just you can, not sure the best way to get your address, Michelle, but we can figure that out at the end. But I'm happy to mail them as well. Just lastly, as we kind of finish up with these slides, we do want to recognize, again, going back to that impact of caregiving on caregiver mental health. There are quite a few barriers to accessing mental health care for our military and veteran caregivers. Unfortunately, there is still quite a bit of stigma around seeking mental health support, particularly in the military community. And then there's this military culture of not always wanting to ask for help and support when you need it. There's policy barriers. And when I say policy in particular, what we're talking about is related to hidden helpers. And there's some current policy where children of military service members and veterans who seek mental health care can experience difficulties later on when they go to enlist in the military because of mental health support that they may have sought as a child or a teen. And that's very unique to children of military service members and veterans, and less so for civilians, just due to access to medical records. There's also a lack of provider cultural competency. So a lot of mental health care providers aren't familiar with military and veteran culture. I can say firsthand as a mental health counselor, I don't believe we covered military and veteran culture at all in grad school. I learned a lot of this when I got to the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. So we're missing that provider cultural competency. And then lastly, which I think is a broader issue that a lot of folks experience, not just unique to the military and veteran community, but there's always a struggle with insurance and high copays, or lack of taking insurance, I should say. So we still have these barriers that exist, which again, not all unique to military and veteran caregivers. I think anybody who's tried to access mental health care is probably pretty familiar with these. But there are some ways that we can help caregivers around us. So if you happen to be a provider, one thing that can be really helpful, as if you are, a healthcare provider or some type of allied health professional, you can ask about military service connection on intake. And if the service member or veteran has any wounds, injuries, or illnesses, and that's for both adults and children. We actually have a really good training for healthcare providers on how to talk to caregiving kids about their caregiving experiences. There's 3 training videos. You would have to listen to my voice again because I narrate them, so apologies for that. But it is a really helpful way to approach the conversation of caregiving if you're not sure how to approach it. And maybe if you're getting some hesitation on the part of the family and they don't want to share with you the caregiving responsibilities that their child is performing and why, and how to navigate that. So that's a really great resource. But we also, are encouraging providers to ask about daily experiences, responsibilities of the caregiver, any support system that they have. Invite that caregiver in to be a co-equal member of the healthcare team if it's an appointment for the veteran. Review that caregiver's roles and responsibilities. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, with really making sure that caregiver is included in the conversation. We also have some training on that if anybody is interested. And then really making sure that whenever possible, if you are referring a caregiver to resources, that you're providing a warm handoff. So you're not just handing them a phone number, but you're actually connecting them with a person who can support them. And then lastly, we really encourage healthcare providers, allied health professionals to become culturally informed, either through office-wide trainings or maybe any continuing education requirements you may have. But to really make sure that you better understand the military and veteran community. If you are a family member, a friend, a peer, we just encourage you to invite conversation around caregiving and non-caregiving topics. You don't only have to talk about caregiving with caregivers. We encourage you to offer to remove barriers to accessing care wherever possible. Maybe you're offering to give a ride. Maybe the caregiver would love to engage in telehealth with their veteran and the VA, but they don't have a computer, but you do, and you have internet access. Maybe you're able to offer that for them. We encourage you to be proactive and reach out first. Again, our caregivers have so much going on, so much on their plate. And that outreach from a family member, a friend, or a peer can really go a long way. You can also offer to take something off the caregiver's plate. So say, for example, their veteran had to have a surgery and is in the hospital for an extended period of time. Maybe you offer to go over and cut their grass. And you say, you know what, I'm going to come over once a week while you guys are away and in the hospital, and I'm going to cut your grass. And you're just taking that off their plate. You're telling them what you're willing to do. You're not asking them how you can help. You're saying, this is what I can do and how I can help you. And that makes it easier for them to say yes. You can also assist with planning ahead for emergencies. Again, so thinking about, maybe what happens if their veteran ends up in the hospital unexpectedly. Who's going to take the dog for a walk? Who's going to feed the cat? Who's going to water the plants? Who's going to cut the grass? Who's going to keep an eye on the house? Who's going to get the mail? Do they need support getting the kids to and from school? So you can step in and talk through that plan with them and offer to step in and take on some of those things in the event of an emergency. You can also validate their experience and emotions. Just listening and validating goes a really long way. And this kind of goes along with that, which I'm sure many folks know. Don't rush to problem solve. Sometimes just listening can go a long way. And if you're not quite sure if they want you to just listen or they want you to problem solve, you can ask. You can say, hey, do you want me to just listen or do you want me to help you find a solution? They'll probably tell you they just want you to listen. I use that with my husband, so I know it works. But that's a really good one. Just being there to listen can really go a long way for the caregivers in your life. And with that, that is actually my last slide. I can check the find the chat and see if there's any questions. But if you do have any follow-up questions after this, or you want to access any resources that I mentioned, my email address is on there. You can also check out our website. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you are a military and veteran community and you're not connected with us, we do have a private online Facebook community for military and veteran caregivers that we invite you to join. You do have to submit proof of service, so usually a DD-214. And it's a moderated group. There's, I think, over 3,000 caregivers in it at this point. So there's a lot of caregivers, and it's a good place to come to seek advice, give advice, and really just connect with other military and veteran caregivers. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. Oh, so Michelle wants the Spotify playlist.
Yeah. There were a couple of comments about the Spotify playlist. And then the comment, the first one in there about the statistics. And I think that was around the youth, and the impact on them. And I really appreciate, this framework addressing, the whole family and the impact on the whole family. It's really significant. I did have, let's see.
I'm gonna pull up the Spotify playlist too.
Oh, okay. So another comment is caregiver is a co-equal, is a cultural norm we need to adopt. I couldn't agree more. And I like the practical suggestions you have, one for self-care. And that's a big thing here at NAMI New Hampshire, and something we talk about. And I think sometimes people really feel like it needs to be a big deal. And I like, stay in the shower for a couple more minutes so you can be by yourself. I know when my kids were little, I spent a lot of time in the shower, and then I couldn't hear the crying too sometimes, or the arguing. But it is really helpful. And I think those were really great practical solutions. I did have one question, and you talk about, I love that you give suggestions for providers on, how to be more responsive, right, to caregivers. Do you have a suggestion for caregivers who feel that their providers are not? So the reverse, without making them defensive, but some good tips for people.
Yeah, so that's actually something we hear a lot from our caregivers, and admittedly, a lot of the work that we've done with our campaign for inclusive care with the VA has really been focused on those providers, right? We've created all this content for the providers, but then we recognize this care is a two-way street, right? And so the caregivers also need to feel empowered to engage in that conversation and to advocate for their space in the room and on the care team. And so in particular at the VA, what's really neat is you can actually be listed as the caregiver in the medical record. And so that's something that we really encourage our caregivers to do, is to connect with the caregiver support program at VA and make sure that you are listed as the caregiver in the medical record. Make sure that you have the release of information filled out for your veteran and the provider that they're seeing. That release of information should be in their medical record, but sometimes providers can't find it. So it's always a good idea to have a copy of that on hand. And then if your veteran says that you can be in the room, you can show them that you have this release, you're listed as the caregiver in the medical record. But it definitely takes some courage to be able to speak up and to advocate for your role in that room. But if you're persistent and professional, I guess is the right word, courteous, like you have to be persistent. And hopefully the provider will let you in. We can't obviously control what every provider does. But in particular, at least with the VA, I know, and again, every healthcare system is going to be different. I don't know if other healthcare systems have a marker for caregivers, but that would be my recommendation. And stay tuned, because we will be releasing a caregiver inclusive care toolkit with some additional information there for caregivers to really help them feel more empowered to advocate for their role on the care team.
That's great. I love that. And you also mentioned about having tools for the hidden heroes, right? For the youth, right? Is that also on the website?
Yeah, so for hidden helpers, I can even pull that. we have quite a few websites. So you get it at hiddenheroes.org. If I post in the chat, I think it only goes to host and panelist.
No, I think you can select to everyone.
I can only pick you two.
Oh, okay.
But
if you put it, I can copy it, or Karen, we can copy and put it in the one to everyone. We can also send out an email to everybody that's registered with information.
Okay, perfect. So I also put in there the Spotify playlist is called Hidden Heroes Favorites, if anybody wants to check it out. And then if you're interested in learning more about Hidden Helpers, you can go to hiddenheroes.org/hidden helpers. And we have quite a few, you can see the link to the research study, which is really what we built our Hidden Helpers programming off of. And then we also have guides and resources for Hidden Helpers in a number of different areas. There's one for education, family members, schools, government. So they're tailored to different audiences, and those are available in English and in Spanish. And then we have training modules for healthcare providers, if anybody is interested. Those don't live on our website. Those live with a children's hospital called Nemours Children's Health, and we developed the training modules in partnership with them. Let me pull up that link as well.
I wasn't able to copy it, but I was able to click on it and then paste it. So while you're looking that up, one thing I want to mention is that NAMI New Hampshire does have a Facebook page for veterans and military families supporting each other. I'm putting that link in the chat. It is a private Facebook page, so you need to click on that and then request to be in the group. We do have a couple of questions in there. Okay, let me see. Did you put something else in that I missed? Here we go.
Yeah, I just put, this is the link to Nemours.
Oh.
And so that's gonna take you to the 3 online courses for providers on how to better engage with hidden helpers who they might be seeing in their practice. That is available for continuing education if anybody needs it, and it's also free. So we encourage you to take it, or if maybe you know a provider that should take it, you can pass it on. Yeah.
I think that's wonderful.
Any other questions?
I think we got them all. So I just want to thank you, Liselle, for your time tonight and preparing for this. I want to mention that this has been recorded and we will be posting it at some point in the near future on the NAMI New Hampshire YouTube channel. So we look forward to that. Anyway, thank you all very much and have a great night.
Thank you.